Today's video is brought to you by our sponsor Card Kingdom, and right now you can pre-order Zendikar Rising by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Zendikar Rising spoilers. And today, kind of an interesting day. So we don't have a ton of cards in an absolute sense, but we have a couple of really sweet mythics and some lower rarity stuff. It's kind of the calm before the storm. Tomorrow kicks off week 2 of spoilers, which has a ton of stuff, and our exclusive spoiler that'll be going up tomorrow on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube, so keep an eye out for that. But anyway, let's talk sweet new Zendikar Rising cards, starting with a amazing red mythic dragon, Leyline Tyrant. So 4 mana, 4/4 flying dragon. You don't lose unspent red mana at the ends of steps and phases. And then when it dies, you can pay any amount of red mana, and if you do, you deal that much damage to any target. This card is absurd. This card is essentially Omnath Locus of Mana, for red, of course, on a slightly more expensive but much bigger dragon, combined with a Banefire almost when it dies. When it dies, you end up with this uncounterable burn spell that's actually even more efficient than Banefire, combined with Thunderbreak region stats. Like, these are all really playable effects. Like, the stats are good, even crossing out the abilities, 4/4 flyer for 4, that's a playable card. Banefire has been very effective, and it's even more effective when it's attached to a body, and then Omnath Locus of Mana wasn't really a standard staple from what I remember, but it's still a very powerful effect. So I think Leyline Tyrant is actually just a really good card. The thing I love about this, if you compare it to Omnath, its ability is really powerful. Green mana doesn't empty from your mana pool at the end of steps and phases, so that is essentially the same ability as Leyline Tyrant. The problem is, if your opponent just kills your Omnath, then you lose all your mana when you go to the next phase. Leyline Tyrant, it has this protection built in. Like, that last ability, when it dies, you can spend any amount of red mana. Worst case, you dump all the mana that you've saved up with Leyline Tyrant into Leyline Tyrant. Best case, you kind of build around it and just go to town. Like, we have cards that can add a lot of red mana, but it's red mana that goes away at weird times, like Braid of Fire. Cumulative upkeep, add a red mana to your mana pool. Normally, that's not very helpful because it's happening on your upkeep, so you can only cast instants. But if you have a Leyline Tyrant out, this mana is just going to keep adding up, adding up, adding up. If your opponent kills Leyline Tyrant, they might even die to all the mana that you have saved up. Worst case, you can use it like a ramp spell. We have like Niheb the Eternal, of course, bugged on Arena, but it's not really bug. If you watch the Minotaur Against Odds, you know what I'm referencing. But Niheb can make a ridiculous amount of mana. Leyline Tyrant can save it up. Ironcrake Feet adds a bunch of mana, so there's tons of ways to ramp into this, and that's not even including some really powerful commander cards. Mana doublers like Gauntlet of Power, Extraplanar Lens, Cage Sun, these cards can let you make a ton of mana, so what you could do is just play your Leyline Tyrant, spend your turn floating all your mana, saving it with Leyline Tyrant, eventually cast some massive spell, and you can put your opponent in this position where if they answer your Leyline Tyrant, they're probably going to die. Like, if you could have 20 red mana floating, which I know is obviously a ton, but if you can get to that point, your opponent kills the Leyline Tyrant, you just spend all that mana, and you have that uncounterable Banefire going at your opponent's face to close out the game. So in a weird way, that ability is actually a pretty powerful form of protection once Leyline Tyrant gets going. As far as standard, we do have some ways to take advantage of Leyline Tyrant. I know I've really fallen in love with Nyx Lotus since Teferi was banned. Nyx Lotus is really powerful. We've played it in like mono black, we've played it in mono blue. Mono red definitely has potential for a devotion color. The problem is it doesn't have any great payoffs. There isn't an actual Banefire in the format. Leyline Tyrant might be the Banefire we need to make mono red devotion work. You just play Leyline Tyrant, bunch of red mana symbols, keep floating all your Nyx Lotus mana to have a ton of mana floating, and then you just sacrifice Leyline Tyrant, wait for it to die, kill your opponent with the massive burn spell to the face, and you can always use it to actually cast spells as well. That's the other upside. I mean, we have stuff like Ugin in Standard. Imagine like turn 4 Leyline Tyrant, turn 5, you float all your mana. Turn 6, you untap. With your floating mana, you're going to be able to easily cast Ugin and then have some mana left over. So I think that Leyline Tyrant is really, really strong. It has a good rate. It has good stats. I think this card has a chance to be standard playable thanks to the weird sort of death trigger protection, and I think people are going to have a blast building around this card in Commander, playing it in janky Braid of Fire shenanigans decks too, where you just try to rush up as much mana as possible and make Leyline Tyrant your main win condition. So I love this card. Really sweet, really unique, and I think quite powerful mythic. Next on our list, we have our green mythic double-faced modal land, whatever, Turntimber Symbiosis, Turntimber Serpent Tidewood. So, of course, one side, a green producing land that can come into play untapped for 3 life. The other side, 7 mana sorcery. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can put a creature card from among them on the battlefield. If it's a little creature, converted mana cost 3 or less, you get to put 3+1/+1 counters on it. The rest go to the bottom of your library in any order. This card's really strong. This card is going to see play. I am very convinced of that. This might actually be the most playable across formats. Bear with me. The most playable across formats of these mythic flip lands we've seen so far. So, Turntimber Symbiosis, of course, the upside end, opportunity cost low, it's on a land, you can play it way more heavily than you could play it if it was just a sorcery. But what do we actually get for playing Turntimber Symbiosis? We essentially get like a See the Unwritten summoning trap style effect, where we're able to dig fairly deeply into our library and snag a creature, which obviously is at its best if you are hitting a big creature. Like, that's the main goal, is you play this and get something massive. On the other hand, Turntimber Symbiosis does have that protection, so even if you whiff and you hit a random 2-drop, a grizzly bear, at least it's going to get bigger thanks to those +1/+1 counters, so there is some protection there from whiffing. Of course, you are paying a little more than you'd want to, like See the Unwritten, 6 mana with upside, Summoning Trap, 6 mana instant with upside. Turntimber Symbiosis is +1 mana, which seems to be a trend, I think, with these mythic flip lands. Essentially, because you're getting a land half that you can play, you're paying like roughly 1 more mana than you would probably pay for the spell otherwise. Still, I don't think that matters. In Standard, we have some really big hits for this deck, and of course, we're in a format that has a lot of ramp, so it shouldn't be that hard to get up to 7 mana for this card, especially since it's also a land. So I'm thinking like Faleth seems insane. You play this with a bunch of basics, makes a bunch of plans. We have Craig play Baloth for Haste Godzilla, Primeval Champion, the biggest, baddest creature we have in Standard, 11/11 trample, Nyx Bloom Ancient to base absurd amount of mana, so there's plenty of good hits in Standard. And as I mentioned, there's plenty of ways to ramp into this. Cultivates, Migration Path, Lotus Cobras, so it's going to be very simple to get up to 7 mana. If we move back to the Commander format, I think this is just literally an auto-include in almost every green deck. I don't want to say every, but green decks in general, what do? They ramp and they play big creatures. If you're playing a green deck that is like some weird archetype that isn't ramping, isn't playing big creatures, that probably changes the equation, and maybe you don't want Turntimber Symbiosis, except actually you still might want it because it's on a land. But in a typical green deck in Commander, I think this is an auto-include, play it in your deck 100% of the time. If you look at the top like 25, 30 green creatures in the format, that list includes things like Voridclex, Vigor, Uvidwald Hydra, Archetype of Endurance, Craterhoof Behemoth. These are really powerful big hits, and you're essentially getting this effect for free, because if you don't need it or you need mana, you can always just play it as a land. And that doesn't even include modern players. Some of the best Amulet Titan players in the world are already talking about this being an easy 4 of in their deck. I mean, it digs for Primeval Titan, it's also a land. You can even play it as a land and then play a bounce land and pick it back up if you don't have your Primeval Titan, and then dig for your Primeval Titan. So this, I think, might be the most heavily played of the mythic flip lands we've seen so far. I think Standard play, almost guaranteed. Commander play, it's a new staple. 4 of in Modern, even, this is going to be a very expensive, extremely playable, very, very strong card. It is absolutely insane. Speaking of flip cards, we got an uncommon I wanted to mention briefly. Melakar Rebirth. So one side, since it's uncommon, is a black source that comes into play tapped. The other side, 1 mana instant, choose target creature, you lose 2 life, and until end of turn, the creature gains. When it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So this is a card that I'm interested in for one big reason, which is this is one of the few double-faced modal flip cards that is actually on curve. We've talked about this a few times, how it seems like the front half of these cards typically are like +1 mana compared to what it would be without a land. Melakar Rebirth, it's just 1 mana, which means, yes, you do lose 2 life, so it does have a bit of a drawback, but it's competitively costed compared to similar versions of this effect. Kaya's Ghost Form has some upsides hitting Planeswalkers, but essentially the same thing. Supernatural Stamina gives you a little bit of a pump spell mix in, but really it's the same thing. So you're already paying this rate without having the land attached. So with Melakar Rebirth, the question isn't, is this card efficient enough or good enough to see play? Because we've already seen the spell half see play, and you just get the land as a bonus. The question is, does your deck want it? And I think there are decks that do want this effect. We've already seen some of the other versions of Melakar Rebirth that we were talking about show up in sacrifice-style decks, where you have like Lurrus. Obviously, Kaya's Ghost form has more shenanigans because you can keep getting it back, but still, Lurrus-style decks, Woe Strider decks, Village Rites-style decks, where you can do some sacrifice shenanigans and really go to town. So I think Melakar Rebirth, I think this card's actually pretty playable. Like, having the right already be good and combining it with a land, why wouldn't you play this card if it's an effect that you want in your deck? Otherwise today, got a couple other uncommons to talk about. Concerted Defense, 1 mana instant, counter an armed creature spell unless its controller plays 1 plus an additional 1 for each creature in your party. So as long as you have a rogue, a cleric, a warrior, or wizard, it gets more expensive. Actually gets more expensive for each of them. This is essentially a bad spell pierce, I want to say. Like, yes, it does have upside if you have multiple creatures on the battlefield. However, the main power of spell pierce is being an early game tempo-y counter. In Concerted Defense, it's going to be hard to have it be an actual spell pierce on turn 1, on turn 2, because you're not going to have a creature on the battlefield. So I feel like this loses a decent amount of value. Not to say there couldn't still be a standard deck that would want to take advantage of it, especially since spell pierce likely isn't going to be in the format. This is probably the next best thing that you can take advantage of. So it's not that it's a bad card, but I would say in most formats and most decks, it is just a worse version of Spell Pierce. Although, if you're in the right deck, where you get a bunch of clerics, rogues, warriors, and wizards, it can be a strong counter spell. We also got maybe the most exciting equipment we've seen so far from Zendikar Rising, Skyclave Pickaxe. So 1 green mana enters a battlefield, you get to attach it to a creature you control, and as landfall, where a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to give the equipped creature +2/+2 until end of turn. Also equips for 3, so the equip is again expensive. That's the trend with these equipment. Cheaply costed like pump spells, powerful abilities, but expensive to equip a second time once you get past that free equip. This essentially turns any creature into a Steplings or into a Uckham Hellhound, which I think these are playable cards. We've seen Steplings be good. I'm excited for the chance of playing an 8 Steplings decks in the modern format, because with fetch lands, a Steplings or a Hellhound can be attacking for 4 on turn 2, and then every turn after that, which is very strong. That is a extremely aggressive 1-drop. Skyclave Pickaxe fits right into that deck. Like, let's say we're playing some sort of Nyazu deck. We go turn 1 Steplings, turn 2 we Pickaxe, put it on the Steplings, play a fetch land, crack a fetch land. That's 2 land drops. Our Steplings is going to be attacking for 8. It'll be an 8/9 attacking on turn 2, and then theoretically the next turn, if we can do it again, we get to maybe just kill our opponent. Let's say we follow that up after cracking our fetch land and hitting for 8 with a Hellhound. The next turn, we fetch land, crack a fetch land. We're going to have a 4-power Hellhound. We're going to have an 8-powered Steplings, 8, 8, and 4. That is 20 damage on turn 3. That does not even seem like a stretch, and you're not even playing a bunch of bad cards. You're playing efficient threats and fetch land. So Skyclave Pickaxe, don't sleep on this one. I know it might not look like much, but I think this card actually has a chance to see play all the way back in Modern, although I will say definitely better in fetch lands formats. In Standard, gonna be a little harder to pull off those shenanigans. You do have like Fabled Passage, but still, I think this is a card I'm mostly excited about for Modern, and we could have a extremely aggressive and potentially very powerful Landfall Zoo deck as a result. Otherwise today, bunch more lore rarity stuff. Not a whole lot to say about it. Black Bloom Rogue does seem like a bomby limited card. I know it seems weird to consider an uncommon that flips into a land a bomb, but it's a land. It is also a relatively on-curve creature as a 3-mana 2/3 with Menace. Might even have a chance to see play in Constructed as well. Otherwise, mostly just random limited stuff, Mine Rots and random creatures. Nothing too exciting, and you can see them all over at MTGPreviews.com if you want to see all the draft chaff along with all the sweet cards. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our daily Zendikar Rising spoilers for today. So, like I said, kind of a short day, couple of mythics, some cool uncommons. Tomorrow it's going to be huge with our Goldfish spoiler and a ton of other spoilers coming. So keep it out for that tomorrow. Anyway, Let me know what you think. How good is Leyline Tyrant? Can that card do things in standard? How do you want to build around it? Or do you just play it for value because it's a good card on rate? What about Turd Timber Symbiosis? Is that the best flip mythic that we've seen so far? Is that just a staple across formats? Amulet Titan in Modern, Standard Wrap decks, Commander every deck. How good is it? What about Melakar Rebirth and the other flip lands that we talked about? Is that one going to see play? Our Party Spell Pierce, is that better than I'm giving you credit for? All the lower rarity stuff, let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I'll be back tomorrow with more Zendikar Rising spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.